My name is Adam Winters, and I'm 38 years old. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who writes about betrayal. For years, my life looked like the kind of picture people put on motivational posters: hard work, success, and a beautiful marriage. But things are rarely as perfect as they seem from the outside. I've spent the last 15 years building a company from the ground up. It's a construction management firm, specializing in contracts for large-scale commercial developments. It was the kind of business that demanded long hours, constant attention, and, unfortunately, sacrifices in my personal life. My wife, Megan, is 32, and when we first got married, she was the center of my world. She worked in marketing back then, ambitious and vibrant. But over time, she gave up her career to focus on our home, while I pursued the dream of building my company into something extraordinary. Things were good for a long time. We had a house we both loved, a comfortable life, and what I thought was a solid partnership. But looking back, I can see now that cracks had been forming in our marriage for years, and I was too blind, or maybe just too busy, to notice them. A year ago, everything changed. My company hit a rough patch. The economy was struggling, clients were pulling out of contracts, and I found myself drowning in debt. I tried to keep it all under control, but no matter how hard I worked, the numbers just didn't add up. Megan noticed, of course. At first, she was supportive, telling me we'd get through it together. But as the months went on and the strain started to show, her demeanor changed. She became distant, distracted, and more buried in her phone. I chalked it up to stress. We were both feeling the pressure, after all, but deep down, I knew something was off. It wasn't just the little things, like how she stopped asking me about my day or how often she seemed to need some space. It was the way she looked at me, like I wasn't the man she thought she'd married. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I could feel her pulling away. Then there was Trevor. Trevor Lang was a real estate developer I'd worked with on several projects over the years. He was 45, wealthy, and one of those men who radiated confidence and charm. He always wore the best suits, drove the newest cars, and had a way of making everyone around him feel like they were part of something big. Megan had met him a few times at company events, and while I'd never paid much attention to their interactions before, I started to notice the way she lit up when he was around. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. But then Trevor started calling me more frequently, asking to meet up for casual business lunches or to brainstorm new ideas. And every time I mentioned him to Megan, she seemed unusually interested in what he'd said or done. One night, after another exhausting day at the office, I came home to find Megan dressed up like she was going to a gala. When I asked her what the occasion was, she brushed me off, saying she was meeting some friends for dinner. Friends? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Anyone I know? She hesitated for just a moment, long enough for me to notice. Just some girls from the gym, she said quickly, grabbing her purse. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she avoided my gaze told me there was more to the story. The real turning point came a few weeks later. I had come home early from a canceled client meeting and found Megan's laptop open on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but a notification popped up just as I walked by: payment received from T. Lang. My heart sank. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was Trevor Lang sending Megan money? I opened the email, my hands shaking. The subject line read, "Thank you for everything." Inside was a short message: "Megan, here's the transfer we discussed. Let me know if you need anything else. Looking forward to next time." I couldn't breathe. I spent the next few days in a haze, piecing together everything I could. I checked her phone, her emails, her credit card statements, things I'd never done before because I'd always trusted her. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Megan had been meeting Trevor regularly, not just for dinners, but at expensive hotels, private events, and even trips I hadn't known about. The payments from him weren't one-time. They were regular, almost like a retainer. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the sheer shock of it all, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that I needed to be smarter about this. So instead of blowing up, I called my lawyer, David. David was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the kind of person you call when you're in trouble and need a clear plan. I told him everything about Trevor, the emails, the payments, He listened quietly, then said, "Adam, we're going to handle this carefully. You need evidence, not just suspicions. Start documenting everything, and don't let on that you know." For the next 2 months, I became a different man. I pretended everything was normal, smiling and nodding my way through conversations with Megan while quietly gathering proof. I tracked her locations, photographed her meetings with Trevor, and recorded every transaction I could find. It was like living a double life, but I knew it was necessary. If I was going to confront her, I needed to be ready for whatever excuses or lies she threw my way. And more importantly, I needed to be ready to take Trevor down. By the time I had everything I needed, I wasn't just angry, I was determined. Megan and Trevor had not only betrayed me personally, but it also insulted everything I'd worked for. My business, my reputation, my trust. It all felt like collateral damage in their affair. But if they thought they could walk away unscathed, they were wrong. After that day, I wasn't the same man. The Adam Winters who trusted his wife and believed in second chances had disappeared, replaced by someone colder, more calculating. Megan and Trevor had decided to betray me in the worst way possible, not just emotionally, but financially. And if they thought I'd sit back and let it happen, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The first thing I did was follow David's advice to the letter. I documented everything. Every payment from Trevor to Megan, every suspicious email and text message, every time her location didn't match the story she told me. It wasn't hard. Megan had grown so comfortable in her lies that she barely even tried to cover her tracks. One night, Megan said she was going out for drinks with friends again. By now, her excuses were almost laughably predictable. I tracked her location on my phone and watched as she went straight to one of Trevor's downtown properties. It was a sleek, glass-walled office building, one I'd helped him secure a few years back when my company was still growing. I sat in my car across the street, watching her walk inside like she owned the place. Part of me wanted to storm in right then and there, to confront them both and end this charade. But I knew better. I'd learned to think 2 steps ahead, and I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I took pictures. The next day, I met with David again, laying out everything I'd collected so far. He sifted through the evidence carefully, nodding as he pieced together the story. "This is strong," he said finally. "If you're ready to move forward with a divorce, we've got more than enough to prove infidelity and financial misconduct. But what about Lang? Do you want to go after him, too?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. David smirked. "I thought you might say that. Lucky for you, I've done some digging of my own. Lang's company isn't as solid as it looks from the outside. He's over-leveraged on several properties, and if the right pressure is applied in the right places, well, let's just say he won't be in business much longer." I sat back in my chair, letting his words sink in. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control return. "Let's do it," I said. While David worked on the legal side of things, I started planning my next moves. I knew I needed to keep Megan in the dark for as long as possible, so I kept up the act. At home, I was the same calm, hard-working husband she'd always known, or at least the version of me she thought she could manipulate. But underneath, I was watching her every move, noting every slip-up, every inconsistency. The hardest part wasn't pretending. It was restraining myself from lashing out every time I saw her smile at her phone or disappear for hours without explanation. But I reminded myself that patience was key. As the weeks went on, Megan's behavior became bolder. She started leaving earlier and coming home later, barely bothering to come up with excuses anymore. I could tell she thought she'd won, that I was too busy with my struggling business to notice what was happening right under my nose. What she didn't realize was that I was using every resource at my disposal to hit back. Trevor Lang wasn't the untouchable businessman he liked to pretend to be. David had been right. His entire operation was built on shaky foundations, with loans and investors propping up his flashy lifestyle. Through a few strategic contacts, I learned that one of his most valuable properties was on the verge of foreclosure. A high-end office building in the heart of downtown, the same one where Megan had been meeting him. It was tied up in a complex web of partnerships and agreements, but if I could step in and buy the building outright, it would send his entire portfolio into a tailspin. The idea of taking something so important to him, something he clearly valued more than loyalty or integrity, was too perfect to pass up. I moved quickly, negotiating with the banks and investors who held the property. At first, they were hesitant to sell, but when I showed them how Lang's financial instability could affect their bottom line, they were more than willing to cut ties with him. By the time the deal was finalized, Trevor Lang's empire was already beginning to crumble. Word spread quickly in the business community, and it wasn't long before his other investors started pulling out. The timing couldn't have been better. Megan came home one evening, her face flushed with excitement. "Trevor's taking me to his new property tomorrow," she said casually, as if we were discussing weekend plans. "It's a big project he's been working on for months." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Sounds nice," I said. She had no idea that by the next morning, Trevor's big project would no longer belong to him. I waited until the perfect moment to reveal everything. Megan thought she was in control, that she could continue to play me for a fool while enjoying the benefits of her arrangement with Trevor. But she didn't realize that I was about to pull the rug out from under both of them. By the time Megan walked out the door that morning, smug and self-assured, my plan was already in motion. She was heading off to meet Trevor at what she thought was his latest trophy, a property that would solidify his reputation and keep their little arrangement well-funded. She had no idea that the property didn't belong to Trevor anymore. It was mine. I arrived at the downtown office building a little after Megan and Trevor had settled in. I wanted to give them enough time to start feeling comfortable before I pulled the rug out from under them. The building manager, who now worked for me, greeted me in the lobby with a knowing smile. "They're up on the top floor," he said. "Conference room." "Good," I replied. "Let's go." As we rode the elevator up, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, satisfaction, and a sense of closure that had been a long time coming. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control of my life. When I walked into the conference room, the first thing I noticed was the look on Trevor's face. He was sitting at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. Megan was beside him, laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The moment they saw me, the mood in the room shifted. Megan's face went pale, her smile freezing in place as she tried to process what was happening. Trevor, on the other hand, looked annoyed. "Adam," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "what are you doing here?" I didn't bother responding to him. Instead, I turned to Megan, who was already starting to squirm in her seat. "Funny seeing you here," I said, my voice calm and steady. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with an explanation, but there was nothing she could say that would fix this. I turned back to Trevor. "I thought you might want to know," I said, sliding a folder onto the table in front of him, "that this property no longer belongs to you." His smug expression faltered. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Check the paperwork," I said. He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside. As the realization hit him, his face turned red with anger. "You," he started, but I cut him off. "Me," I said. "This building is mine now. As of this morning, you don't have any claim to it. In fact, I'd say your entire portfolio is looking a little shaky right now, wouldn't you?" Trevor stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything from me?" I met his glare without flinching. "You took something from me first," I said. "Consider this payback." Megan finally found her voice. "Adam, please let me explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, turning to face her. "That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been taking money from him behind my back? That you've been meeting him here while I was breaking my back to keep our life together?" She looked down at the table, unable to meet my gaze. "I trusted you," I said, my voice quieter now. "And you threw it all away for what? A little extra cash? A man who couldn't even keep his own business afloat?" Trevor tried to interject, but I silenced him with a glare. "This has nothing to do with you anymore," I said. "Get out of my building." He hesitated for a moment, then stormed out of the room without another word. Once he was gone, I turned back to Megan. "This is over," I said. "Our marriage, this charade, everything. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and the divorce papers are ready to go. I'm done." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. Adam, please, she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. I can fix this. We can fix this. I shook my head. You don't get it, do you? There's nothing left to fix. You destroyed it all. I left her sitting there in the conference room, her face buried in her hands. As I walked out of the building, I felt a sense of finality I hadn't felt in months. But it wasn't over yet. The next few weeks were brutal. The divorce process was as messy and painful as I'd expected. Megan tried to fight for more than she was entitled to, claiming she deserved a larger share of our assets because she'd sacrificed so much during our marriage. But David was prepared. With the evidence I'd gathered, we were able to prove her infidelity and misuse of marital resources. In the end, she walked away with nothing but her personal belongings. As for Trevor, his downfall was swift and public. Losing the downtown office building was the first domino to fall. Once word got out about his financial troubles, investors started pulling out of his other projects. Within months, his once thriving real estate empire was in shambles. I'd like to say that taking him down felt like a victory, but the truth is, it didn't. It didn't fix the pain of Megan's betrayal, or the emptiness left behind when our marriage ended. In the end, I was left with a broken heart, a pile of legal bills, and the realization that the life I'd spent years building was gone. Starting over wasn't easy, but I knew I didn't have a choice. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal cuts deeper than anything else. But it also teaches you who you really are and what you're willing to do to protect yourself.